I'm looking at Perek Mem Daled, and if you recall, Perek Mem Daled was really a discussion of the idea that the exact time of the case is not known to us, and when Yaakov Avinu wanted to be Megala the case, so it was Nistam, it was taken away from him, he was not able to remember it, and that's when he was Choshesh, that his children were perhaps not worthy, and they said back to him, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and he answered back, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Olam V'ed. So the Maharal generally, so Perek Mem Daled is really devoted to two different things, but they're connected. One is the idea that the case comes from such a high level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence that by definition it's unknowable. It's not an aspect of Hashem that is within our Yediyah. And only Yaakov Avinu, that is Chokuk on the Kisei HaKavod, it's Mamish, is able to be mechaven to such a thing. And the second thing, though, is very, very interesting because the Maharal integrates what would otherwise be a stira and agadata. Because this Gemara, which is Gemara Pesachim, indicates that Yaakov was mechadesh, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Olam V'ed, and yet we have another Gemara that says Moshe Rabbeinu took it from the Malachei Yashares. So is it from Yaakov or is it from Moshe? And the Maharal says it's not really a stira because the emes is that Baruch Shem is a miyuchadik shvach that's only shaykh for a person on a very, very, very high level. So it was shaykh for Yaakov. It wouldn't be shaykh for his sons. His sons could say Shema Yisrael, but they couldn't say Baruch Shem. Memela, Yaakov was able to do it because Yaakov was on the Madrega of a Malach, but otherwise it actually belongs to the Malachim. And Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have the right to make it accessible to everybody. And that's why we say it balachash, to acknowledge that really it's a shvach that shaykh to the malachim. But on Yom Kippur, where we reach a certain madrega of kedusha, we could say it out loud. And then we discussed, we went off a digression a little bit about Baruch Shem, the Beis Hamikdash was also said out loud, and Yehi Shmei Rabbah, which is Aramaic for Baruch Shem, can also be said out loud because the Malachei Yashares are not makir. So in Perek Memhe, just the next Perek, the Maharal is Mamshech. Let's find out. The Maharal is Mamshech with the idea that the case is a davar nister ma'id. Now, once again, he is masbir that on one hand we can bring Mashiach every single day through tshuva and ma'asim tovim. That the Gemara itself says. Someone asked Eliyahu Hanavi, when is Mashiach coming? And Eliyahu Hanavi answered, Hayom im bekolo tishma'u. So it's shaykh to have what's called an achishena. Achishena is Hashem can hasten it. And that could be today, that could be, actually not tomorrow, Erev Shabbos not, but whatever it is, except for Shabbos and Erev Shabbos, we can come every day. If we're Zaycha, or the other way around. It can also come if we're so bad, we're like the Jews in Mitzrayim, that we're going to hit the 50th level, so Memela Mashiach has to come. But there is an outside limit, and that outside limit is very, very nister. There are Ramazim all over the place, but it's nister, and Chazal were even critical of people that are Machashvei Kitzim, because it's very likely they'll get it wrong. So the Maharal goes into some interesting Gemaras in Memhei that says the following. He says, this is in Sanhedrin, Tzadik Zayin Amid Beis, Omar le Eliyahu l'Rav Yehuda, Achva de Rav Salah Chasida. Just matter of course. Eliyahu Hanavi happened to talk to Rav Yehuda, the brother of Rav Salah the Chassid. It's interesting. Rav Salah is the Chassid. Rav Yehuda is not even called Chassid, and yet he's Zeicha to talk to Eliyahu Hanavi, just a matter of course. And Eliyahu Hanavi says the surprising, interesting number. Ein ha'olam pachais mishmainim v'chamisha yavleis uve'yayvel ha'acharein ben David ba. The world will not endure less than 85 Jubilee periods. And at the end of those 85 Jubilee periods, Mashiach will come, Ben David will come. A Yovel is 50 years. We happen not to observe Yovel, but that makes no difference. I mean, different halachic reasons. But Yovel is 50 years. So 85 Yevlas is what? 4,250 years, is that right? Because 85, yeah, right, because 85 times 100 would be 8,500. 85 times 50 would be half of that, which is 4,250 years. So l'chayra, we have a pretty definitive statement that Mashiach will come, counting from Brias Olam, after 4250. Now, considering that we are in, without giving, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but considering that we're in 5,786, 4250 was a while ago, which was around 1,500 years ago. So what's the pshat? So the Maharal says like this. Maharal says, before we even understand why is 85 Yevlis even relevant, and that's even a more basic question. But in terms of the fact that the time passed, the Maharal says like this. The Maharal says that all Eliyahu Navi meant was, he's kind of giving a range, that Mashiach will not come earlier than the expiration of the 85 Yovlos, but it might come later. Now, l'chayra, that's not true either. Once you're talking about Mashiach coming early, it can come today, or even before that. Yeah, so the answer is, this is interesting, that in terms of tshuva and ma'asim tovim, Mashiach can come anytime. That's called achishena. Elamai, there's ita. So ita, Eliyahu Navi is not giving him an exact time. He's just telling him it's no earlier than 85 Yevlis. But it's still ita, meaning enochinami. Mashiach can come earlier than that through achishena, but through ita, I'm not telling you the date, Eliyahu Navi says. But I'm telling you it's not going to be earlier than 4250, but enochinami, it might be later. I don't know. Anytime after 4250 is potentially the case hayamin. Okay, so that's the Maharal understands it. But then the question becomes, what is special? What is unique? What is significant about 85 Yevlis, right? Why is that even important? So he goes through a very interesting explanation, and I have to admit, a lot of it I do not understand. I'll just tell you what he says. Maybe you can make a little more sense of it. He brings from Sefer Yetzirah that the world was created. Hashem began the creation of the world with the letter Beis, because indeed, the Torah says, Bereshis bara Elokim, that the letters were arguing who should be the first letter. It's not so much of the Torah, but who should be the first letter that begins Brias HaOlam. So Aleph said, I'm number one. Beis said, I correspond to bracha. Number one, Beis is the first letter of bracha. But number two, multiplicity is already bracha. Right? I am the increase of things. And the world is a world of bracha. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu was maschil brias ha'olam with ois beis. Maharal even says a fascinating thing, that every letter in the word Baruch, if you don't count the Vav, which is really an extra letter, corresponds to riboy, because Beis is the multiplicity of ones, of units. Reish is the multiplicity of hundreds, 200, and Chaf is the multiplicity of tens. So the whole word bracha or baruch corresponds to the notion of a riboy, the riboy of the ones. All the hundreds and tens are out of order, but the riboy of the ones, the riboy of the tens, the riboy of the hundreds. So he was maschil with 9. I'm sorry, maschil with a base, maschil with base. But then he utilized the next 8 letters. He ended with Yud, meaning the basic structure of the number system is 1 to 10, Aleph to Yud. Everything else is just a repetition of those patterns. So therefore, the Bria was created through the letters Beis through Tes. Beis through Yud. Beis through Yud were the kochos through which God created the world. So then he says like this. He says that each ice has a kayach to be bayrei 10 olamas. Each ice has a kayach to be bayrei 10 olamas. So actually, that would mean if you have 9 letters from Beis to the Yud, and you multiply that by 10, that would give you a number of 90. But he says the Eis Yud is only counted as half a letter. And the reason is because Yud is a transition between the ones and the tens. And therefore, only half of it has a shaykhus to the ones. So therefore, we have 8.5 letters were involved in creating 10 ilamais. Each Yovel period is called a world. It's called an ilam. When the Torah says by an Eved, right? If an Eved Ivri who gets free after 6 years, but if he wants to stay on, he gets his ear pierced. And what does the Torah say? Avado liolam. He shall work forever. And as Rashi explains, that means he works until Yovel. Yovel is called an ilam. Of course, ilam has 2 meanings. It's forever and it's also world. But if Yovel is called a world, in fact, every Yovel is a new world is created. Property goes back to where it was. It's like you're starting again. Yovel itself kind of indicates the world is recreated after 50 years. You move the clock back. So Mamela, the Maharal says, the significance of 85 Yovelis is connected to the notion that Hashem made Olam Hazeh with the kayach of the letters between Beis and Yud. Yud only counts as half a letter, not because of its size, but because Yud has only half a shaykhus to the ones and half a shaykhus to the tens. Each one has 10 ilamais. Yovel equals an ilam echad. Therefore, 8.5 times 10 gives you 85 yovelis, right? So again, it's a lot I don't understand, but this is what the Maharal says. The significance of 85 yovelis is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mishtamesh with 9 letters. By the way, this is one of the good examples. Maharal never quotes Kabbalah. Maharal does not quote Zohar, does not quote any Kabbalah. And there was an old debate in the Hakdama to some of the Maharal's Ksavim. His sons, right, because Kabbalah was very unpopular then, and you can get in big trouble. They said, our father had no shaykhus, to any of this. He never looked at any of this, But, it's obvious that anyone that learns anything in Maharal knows Maharal is filled with Kabbalah. But the thing was, he doesn't use Kabbalistic terminology. The Maharal uses philosophical language. And chaimer, tzura, form, substance. I mean, this is all philosophical. This is pure Plato, Aristotle. People think Maharal made the terms. No, this is just a Hebrew translation for very normal, standard terms in Aristotelian philosophy. So the Maharal certainly learned Kabbalah. In fact, he says all the time, this is a sod, and he's giving all sorts of hints that he's talking about Kabbalah. And this would be an example of something that's very, very clearly Kabbalistic, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mishtamish with the kaychais of 9 letters, and one of those letters counts as only half, and each has a kayach to make 10 olamais, and Yovel is called an olam, and that's how you get 8.5, that's how you get 85 Yovelis. But once again, the Maharal says, that still doesn't mean it will happen. It just means that after that point, the case could be anything after that point. Now he then brings another Mandi Amar, who gives a slightly different quantification. And this is actually an interesting story. Sholach Rav Chanan bar Tachalifa le Rav Yosef. Rav Chanan bar Tachalifa sent a message to Rav Yosef. Matzasi Adam Echad. I bumped into a guy, maybe not even Jewish. Ubiyadai Megillah Achas Ksuva Ashuris V'Lashon HaKodesh. And he was holding a scroll that was written in Ksav Ashuris, that's the Ksav of a Sefer Torah, and in Hebrew. Amarti lo, zumi nayin lach. Apparently he's talking to a non-Jew. Where did you get this? This was in Rome. Amar li, l'chayalos niskarti. I was a mercenary. I was a soldier in the Roman armies. Ubein ginzei raimi mitzasiya. And I found this document that had somehow been captured by the Romans. They just took stuff. And what does the document say? Liachar dalid alafim umasayim v'tishim v'yechad shana liachar briyasa shalolam. After 4,000 4,291 years. That's 4,291, as opposed to the 85 Yovlos. That was 4,250. So there's a 41-year discrepancy. Okay, well, the Maharal will deal with that one as well. But it says after 4,291 years, the world will be a yasem. The world will be orphaned. Mehem milchamais taninim. Some of the world will be overwhelmed with wars of serpents. Mehem milchamais Gog and Magog. And some of the world will be overwhelmed with the wars of Gog and Magog, the pre-Messianic wars. Vashar Yemot HaMashiach. And the rest will be Yemos HaMashiach. So Maharal is masber that the 41, this number, 4,291, is also connected to the 85 Yovlos, meaning after 85 Yovlos, Mashiach can come, but then he needs 40 years of maturation and growth. 40 years of maturation and growth. It's not clear what that even means. Is that spiritual or physical? Are we talking about Mashiach is born after the 85 Yovlos and he's not going to reveal himself? But then, the same way that a baby, a fetus, is not considered to be human till after 40 days from conception. So Mashiach has to undergo a 40-year growth. So the Maharal says that essentially this figure too is based on the 85 Yovlos plus a maturation period of 40 years. Mashiach can come after us, but even then, the Maharal says that just means that is when the case could be, but not necessarily it will be. There are different considerations there. So he's trying to be masber both of those mandiyomrim, and neither of them are a stira to the idea that through Achishena, Mashiach could come right away. Now, I'm not sure if I'm learning, happen to be learning in the center, Sefer Daniel, which has its own messianic calculations. And the truth is, it doesn't agree, at least it doesn't agree with anything that's been said here. But let me just mention it again. Sefer Daniel is a 12 prakim, and it's a very equal division. The first 6 prakim are mainly biographical. The famous story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who were his friends, thrown into the fiery furnace because they did not bow down to Avodah Zarah, and the story of Daniel being thrown into the lion's den and being saved. Actually, the story of Daniel is actually a little schwer, because Bishlam, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Nebuchadnezzar made a gezerah to bow down to the statue like Avodah Zarah. So for Avodah Zarah, Harav Yavra, you're mechuyev to give up your life. So they were mechuyev to be Meiser Nefesh. Right? So that's why they were willing to die, and the Eibishter did a miracle to save them. In Daniel, this is a later king. This is already under Persia, Daryavesh. And Daryavesh actually liked Daniel. In fact, Daryavesh didn't want to throw him into a lion's den, but he had been convinced to make a crazy law that for the next 30 days, just for a month, nobody could pray to any god. They could only ask Daryavesh for favors. They appealed to his ego that, don't ask of anything except for me. And Daniel went ahead and he davened, and he was being watched, and he got arrested, and the advisor said, we have to kill this man because he violated edict. And the king actually said, I didn't mean you, I didn't want you. But once again, Persia had this crazy rule that the Megillah was Merames too, that even the king cannot repeal the laws of Persia, Paras Umadai. Daryavesh is stuck. That is the reductio ad absurdum of infallibility. You're so perfect that it's not shaykh for you to say what you did was wrong. Right? So Daryavesh didn't even want to do this, and he said to Daniel, I hope God will protect you, etc., etc. But what happened? But the big question is, okay, if a government is geyser, bow down to an idol or you'll die, you're mechuyev to give your life. If the government is geyser, you're not allowed to daven. Okay, at least for 30 days, but even if it would be permanent, is that a case of Yahari Vel Yavar? I mean, are you mechuyev to be Meiser Nefesh and daven if your life, if they're going to kill you? I mean, according to the Rambam, just to go a little halacha, according to the Rambam, there is no such category as voluntary Kiddush Hashem. Meaning, for the Gimel Chamurais of Avodah Zarah, Gilei Arayah, Shvichas Damim, you are mechuyev to die. For anything else, let's say a person is in the concentration camp and he doesn't want to eat treif, even if that means he's going to die. According to the Rambam, you're not allowed to do that. If the halacha is you should be over and not die, then you're not allowed to die because that would be treated as suicide. So you're either mechuyev to give your life or you're not allowed to give your life. That's how the Rambam puts it in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah. So according to that, we can't simply say that Daniel wanted to be Meiser Nefesh, to be Mekadesh Hashem. He would only be allowed to be Meiser Nefesh if he was mechuyev to be Meiser Nefesh. Now you're only mechuyev to be Meiser Nefesh for Avodah Zarah, Gilei Arayah, Shvichas Damim. So how would we characterize a decree, you're not allowed to daven for a month? It didn't say they have to bow down to, have to worship anybody. So it really is a bit of a shaila. What was Daniel's heter? Now, Lamaisa, many Rishonim are chaylik in the Rambam. Many Rishonim say that a Yid has the right to be Meiser Nefesh for any mitzvah, to be Mekadesh Hashem. And the fact that we say, Yavor v'yal yehareg, that's a reshus. It's a reshus that you're allowed to transgress. But if you want to be Mekadesh Shem Shemayim, you're permitted to do so, and you're holy. So that would be a teretz, not like the Rambam. Daniel wanted to be Meiser Nefesh, but like the Rambam, it's a shver ma'isa. What is Daniel's heter? Not to daven. I'm sorry. What is his heter to daven? If that's going to put his life in danger. So you might give a Balabatish answer. The Balabatish answer is Daniel didn't think he would be caught. I mean, it's a different thing. Bishlama, the bowing down, which was a public thing. You're walking in the public, you don't bow down. Everyone's going to see. Daniel is davening at home. I mean, I know, for example, in the days before Saudi Arabia became so accommodating to Jews, now they're a little more accommodating. You weren't allowed to bring tefillin in. You weren't allowed to do any Jewish services in Saudi Arabia. Maybe that's still the law. It's not the Emirates. But I know that there were American Jews without Israeli passports. Who got in with American passports for different jobs they were doing. And they described that they would daven, but they would close the curtains and they'd go away from the window and they would be very quiet so a microphone wouldn't pick up what they were doing. But they davened in Saudi Arabia. So you might say maybe that's Daniel's cheshbon too. Daniel thought he wouldn't be caught. But on the other hand, that's not the way it's described. It's described as he davened in front of the windows, facing Yerushalayim. I mean, it's mashma that he put himself in front of a window. And since Daniel knew that this whole law was in order to frame him, and that was the tachlis. It says that these were people who were jealous of Daniel. So he should have figured, or he could have figured, that they were watching him. They were watching him. He wasn't just going to be left alone. So it is a bit of a kasha like the Rambam. Why was Daniel Meiser Nefesh? But be it as it may, that the first 6 prakim of Daniel are biographical, the famous stories. The last 6 prakim are a series of all sorts of visions that he has that are connected to the 4 Malchios, Bavel, Paras, Yavan, Rome, and ultimately the Chashmonaim, their struggles, and Rome destroying the base of Mikdash, and really Nevuos that take him all the way to Acharis Hayamim. All the way to Acharis Hayamim. And again, very explicit numbers. The numbers are very explicit, but nobody knows what they mean. So there are different calculations. So Rav Sadia Gaon tries to calculate it, and Rashi tries to calculate it, and Ramban tries to calculate it, and even the Malbim tries to calculate it. He's the last one, really, of the classical Meforshim who tried to do it. And Rashi himself comments on Rav Sadia Gaon. Rav Sadia Gaon gave this interpretation, but it already passed. So Rashi gives an interpretation which has already passed, as Ramban's interpretation and the like. So let me just give you Rashi's interpretation at the very end of the Sefer. First of all, there's a lot interesting, besides the Messianic date, which happens not to be right, there's a lot of interesting extra stuff in this Rashi that's Kedai to be Aimed on. This is the Malach Gavriel telling Daniel about when the Kates will be. And he says that the Kates will be from the time that the Tamid is discontinued. Now, Daniel is before the Bayesheni, so this is talking about the Tamid being discontinued by the Chorban Bayesheni. In other words, many years in the future. From the time that the Tamid is removed till it gets reestablished will be 1,290 years. And then the next pasuk says, and happy is the person who lives for the 1,335 years. So it has two contradictory numbers right off the bat. So here is what Rashi says. And this part of Rashi is actually very, very interesting, pshat generally. Rashi says that the Korban Tamid was discontinued 6 years before the Chorban Beis HaMikdash. 6 years before the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, the Korban Tamid was discontinued. Now, let's connect this to a well-known Mishnah that you know. Right, the Mishnah at the end of Maseches Tainis talks about the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, and it talks about the fast of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, both Batei Mikdash were destroyed. Shivas Arba Tammuz, one of the things that happened was Hufka Ha'ir, this is the Bayesheni, the Romans broke through the Jerusalem wall. Ubatel HaTamid, and the Korban Tamid was discontinued. The way most people learn that is they connect those two things, meaning essentially the Tamid was discontinued the last 3 weeks of the Beis HaMikdash because once the Romans were in the city, it was not possible to do the Avodah. In other words, Hufka Ha'ir Batal HaTamid on 17th of Tammuz is the 17th of Tammuz that is 3 weeks before the Chorban. That's how most people learn. Rashi he doesn't say it in Tainis, Maseches Tainis, but he says it in Sefer Daniel. Rashi learns not that way. Rashi learns Hufka Ha'ir was 3 weeks before the Chorban. The Romans entered the city. But Batal HaTamid was the Shivas or B'Tammuz 6 years before the Chorban. The last 6 years. Batal HaTamid, because the Romans were besieging us already. They were making it more and more difficult. So that's quite amazing, that the last 6 years, Batal HaTamid. But then the question becomes, what does Batal HaTamid mean exactly? What does it mean, Batel HaTamid? Does it mean it was totally discontinued? Or does it just mean it was no longer Tamid? In other words, you could imagine a situation where maybe 6 years before the Chorban, it was no longer dependable that they would have a Korban every day. Meaning they sometimes missed it, even if they only missed it like once. In other words, but see, Bishlama, if Batal HaTamid means the last 3 weeks. So that's plausible, although it doesn't have to mean that even there, that it means the last 3 weeks they couldn't bring Korbanos at all. I mean, they're in a state of war. The Romans are going through the city, massacring people. So essentially, the temple service got discontinued. But it doesn't seem logical to me that for a whole 6 years they didn't bring Tamidim, they didn't bring Musafim. So I would suggest on the Estaiti that the meaning of Batel HaTamid 6 years before the Chorban just means it was no longer reliable and dependable that they could do it every day, meaning there were days they couldn't do it. And it could be, in a chinami, Rashi would be Maida that for 95% of the time they brought the Korban Tamid, but it wasn't always. It wasn't an absolute Tamid, right? So that's the question of Batal Tamid. So that's a big chiddush of Rashi, that the Tamid was Batal, whatever that means, 6 years before the Chorban. Therefore, Rashi says, when it says the Geula will come 1,290 years from Bittul HaTamid, that's essentially 1,284 years from the Churban Beis HaMikdash, which was 6 years later. Now, if you take that date, when the Second Temple was destroyed, different opinions, it's between 68 and 70. 70 is the most common date. So if you add 1284 to 70, so that gives you the date 1354. Should have been the date of Mashiach, according to Rashi, right? The year 1354, which is always, after Rashi's time, meaning it was like 200 years ahead of Rashi. But that's a fascinating point. I'll get back to that. And now, what is the next figure? Right, the first figure is 1,290 Mi'es Hasaras HaTamid. But then there's another figure, 1335. What is that? So the difference between 1290 and 1335 is 45 years. It's pretty close to the 41 years, but it's a different thing. Rashi brings an amazing medrash that after Mashiach is Niskala, he will then conceal himself for 45 years. And we won't know if he's dead or alive or coming back or not coming back. But he will be Niskala after 45 years. So the 1290 will be the initial appearance, and the 1335 will be the final appearance. Now this lends a little bit of credence to the Chabad narrative. How many years has it been since the Rebbe was Nifter? It hasn't been 40 years yet, but that's right. So all of a sudden, people start learning Daniel. They haven't looked at it that much before, but that's there. But he brings from Rabbi Elazar HaKalir. Rabbi Elazar HaKalir was the great poet of Piyutim, and he incorporates many midrashim we actually don't have. And this is a midrash that he talks about, that the Mashiach will be concealed. Ramban gives a different hesber for the 45 years, and that is Mashiach ben Yosef versus Mashiach ben David. The 1290 is Mashiach ben Yosef, and 45 years later will be Mashiach ben David. That's how he explains the two dates. But again, what do we make of the fact? I think I said it last week, but just to repeat it for emphasis, what do we make of the fact that Rashi got it wrong? Rashi gives us a 1335 and whatever it is. If Saadia Gaon has an earlier date and Ramban has a slightly later date, which also it all passed. So what's going on? Did they simply make a mistake? Did they simply not understand? It is possible. The other possibility is that when these nevuos are given in such ways that they can be interpreted multiple ways, then every single possibility is a possibility, meaning to say, Mashiach could have come had we been Zocha, meaning these were set aside dates which would have been worthy of redemption. But because we were not, in other words, they're not the absolute case, but because we're not worthy, so it doesn't turn into that. That's the idea of an open-ended nevuos. Nevuos are given so they can be interpreted in different ways, but all of the interpretations might well be emes, because it depends on the madrega that we're in at any given moment in time, right? So we don't have to say Rashi was wrong or anything. It's just that Rashi gave a calculation. And what would be interesting is that the Meforshim say that when something is a Zaman of Geula, but we're not worthy of it, there will be something else that happens, some significant event that is somehow connected to Geula. It's a certain step that brings us. So what one could do, if you were so inclined, and I have not been able to do it, is go back to all of these years. Because in the Rishonim, you can identify probably 10 different years, as it were. Go back to those years and see what happened in those years that might have had some significance, in which something could have turned into a redemptive experience, but it did not turn into that redemptive experience. People do it sometimes. What do they say? The Zohar says it by the Mabul. Yeah, this is what the Zohar says. The Zohar says, in the 600th year of Noach. So it says, the windows of the sky is opened, and the water came pouring down. The 600th year of Noach. So the Zohar HaKadosh says, this is a remez in the 600th year of the 6th millennium. Now the 6th millennium is from the year 5000. So from 5600, right? That's the 600th year of the 6th Elef Hashishi. There is potentially a great infusion of Mayim, which is wisdom. Wisdom will suffuse the world. And potentially that could have been Geula. But it's been pointed out that starting from 5600, which is what, 286 years ago, that was number one, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, steam engines and various other important inventions. It was also a very, very great age in Torah learning. The Vilna Gaon, the Ketsos, Nesivos, Rebbe Akiva Eiger, in other words, was actually a growth of Torah that had been much greater than some generations before. A flourishing of Amkus in Torah. And potentially it could have been messianic. It could have been a Zman of Geula as well. Instead, it turned into these other manifestations, which are also good. The Industrial Revolution, Lahavdil, Limud HaTorah. Could be rain as well. I'm not sure if it's the record of flooding during those times. But the Zohar says that the 600th year of the 6th millennia would be a Zman of great Mayim in all of its different meanings. So that would actually mean that you search the historical dates and see what happened in those dates that could have been his Osiris for Geula. But in truth, that gets you into big trouble, though. That does get you into big trouble because with Shapsai Tzvi, they made such cheshbainis. I don't have all the dates, but many people followed him because they calculated based on different cheshbainis that this was a messianic time. You know, it's interesting that the Rambam has a letter that he wrote to the Yemenite community, Igeres Teiman, that were undergoing very severe persecutions by Islam. And he was there to give them nechama, give them comfort, give them chizuk. In fact, he really saved the community so much that they incorporated his name in Kaddish during his lifetime. And they said, B'chayechon uvyamechon uv'chayei maranav Rabbana Harav Moshe ben Harav Maimon. That they prayed that the Geula should come in your lifetime, our lifetime, and in the lifetime of the Rambam. They actually were mispalo for the Rambam because he really, really saved them. He really saved them. And that's why among many, many Yemenite Kehilas, Machlokes, they use the Rambam as their absolute source of halacha. They do not even follow the Shulchan Aruch. I mean, Shulchan Aruch follows the Rambam a very high percentage of the time, but not always. And they just look at the Rambam. They don't look at the Shulchan Aruch. They consider the Rambam to be their posek in all ways. And that goes back, because those are the Yemenites who are anti-Kabbalah too. That's a separate issue. But they feel that's also the way the Rambam would have been too. They want to follow the Rambam in all of those different ways. So in Igeres Teiman, not only were the Muslims persecuting the Jews, but the Jews were also hit from the other side with false Mashiachs to kind of give them so-called comfort. I mean, you understand that false Mashiachs tend to emerge at times of great persecution. So the Rambam had to fight both of these battles at the same time, give them chizuk not to succumb to the Muslims, but also disabuse them from following false Mashiachs. And the Rambam writes there when, he gave a lot of reasons why this guy was not Mashiach. They say he's crazy, he's not a big Talmid Chacham, etc. And the Rambam gave different reasons why he's not the right guy. The Rambam also warned them, you're going to get into a lot of trouble with your Islamic rulers if they think you're getting a king of the Jews that will take you back to Eretz Yisrael. He says, I advise you, go to the government right away and say, this guy is crazy, this guy is nuts, and that way it'll be good for him. They won't throw him into prison, they'll just let him wander around, and it'll be good for you. Otherwise, you're going to get into tremendous amount of trouble. Okay. But the Rambam there spends a few pages on the notion of not calculating the messianic times, not to be machashev esaketz. But even though Rav Saadia Gaon did it, etc., the Rambam says we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to calculate when Mashiach has to come, because either we'll get it wrong or it'll be too far away and it'll break our spirit. Don't calculate when Mashiach comes. But after he says that, he says, but I heard something from my father that had a Messiah. After he said it, the sentence after he said, don't calculate messianic times, he says, but I got to tell you something. And again, the explanation for that is what the Rambam himself said as a limud zuchos and Rav Saadia Gaon. Because he says, Rav Saadia Gaon was machashev esaketz. So the Rambam says Rav Saadia Gaon did it because he saw the suffering of the Jewish people, how they felt so hopeless and they felt so abandoned. So he felt that gave him a justification to give them a definite date, not in their lifetime usually, but at least they'll know it's coming. So the Emes says the Rambam is doing exactly the same thing. So I want to give you the Rambam's remes that he said he got from his father. And also, it's not, none of these dates correspond to anything. All these different dates, the 85 Yovlos is a different date, but I'll give you the date that the Rambam says. The Rambam says, and maybe this is a partial teretz for him, it's not really a date for Mashiach. It's a date when Nevuah will come back to Klal Yisrael. Now, we did lose Nevuah at the beginning of the Bayis Sheni. The last Nevi'im were Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. When it's going to be the Zman of Mashiach, Nevuah will come back, and Eliyahu Hanavi will bring Nevuah back. But that will happen before Mashiach comes. Seemingly right before Mashiach comes, but maybe not right before. So the Rambam is not giving us a messianic date. The Rambam gives us a date for the return of Nevuah to Am Yisrael, which is a precursor to Mashiach. By the way, this is discussed too with Rav Kook. Rav Kook has many sfarim that were published, but there were diaries, private diaries of Rav Kook that were not published, and they were kept in Merkas Harav under lock and key. They weren't even available for Talmidim, but some of the Rosh Yeshiva had access to these private diaries of Rav Kook, and somebody broke in and stole them. He felt he was doing a mitzvah l'shem shamayim to be machzor this Torah. By the way, there is such a thing. Halachically, it's totally yasser, but there is such a cheshbon. This is not the first time. It happened with Rav Chaim Vital and the Eitz Chaim, etc. He refused to allow anybody to see the Eitz Chaim. He had it buried with him, and they actually unearthed his grave to find pieces of the Eitz Chaim. So there was a concept of sometimes stealing, digging up graves, to find holy svarim that were not being shared. So in these diaries, the diaries are very, very, very unusual. Rav Kook talks about the restoration of Nevuah before Mashiach, and Rav Kook is at least toying with the idea. He doesn't know. Maybe he's a Navi. In terms of, how do you know exactly? It's such an unfamiliar experience, right? Let's imagine, what would you feel at one point? Let's imagine you got hit with Nevuah. Would you know what it was? What exactly would you know? What exactly would you feel? Would you be worried that you become a paranoid schizophrenic? Like what would you think? Right. So so again, Baruch Hashem, most of us don't have those nisyonos per se, but someone like Rav Kook again was seriously struggling with the idea that perhaps he was zocher to Nevuah because he very much believed the same way I told you about the Lubavitcher Rebbe Mashiach. I said he didn't know. Right, that's my take on it. He didn't know, but he was a candidate. He didn't know. So Nevuah could be a similar thing. But once again, though, going back to the Rambam does say Hachsaras Nevuah is a Tanai before Bias Mashiach. So when will Nevuah come back? So this is what the Rambam says. we look at it in Bilam's prophecies. It's very interesting that the Rambam himself says in the Mishnah Torah that much of what Bilam is talking about is Mashiach. That's when he says, Arenu v'loata, I see them and not now. Ashurenu, I gaze at them, v'lo b'karov. It's not near. It's a distant future. Darach kochav miyakov, a star shall come from Yaakov. That's why Rabbi Akiva called Bar Kochba, the son of a star, meaning it's clear. Rabbi Akiva himself is basically saying Bilam's nevuos are messianic nevuos. So there's a pasuk in one of Bilam's nevuos, Ko'es, like this time, Yeyomer li Yaakov, it shall be said to Yaakov, Ma po'al kale. Actually, the English translation is very, very famous. What hath God wrought? Ma po'al kale. The reason why this pasuk is so famous is when Samuel Morse invented the telegraph. Right, the telegraph. They could send messages in Morse code. So the first message he sent was, "What hath God wrought?" Ma po'al kale. So it's a chaval that people know the pasuk more from Samuel Morse than they know it from the Chumash. But still, this is the pasuk in English in Morse code that Morse used to convey by the telegraph. Okay, are there still telegrams? There's no reason for it, right? So that's an industry that's totally defunct. It's interesting, mamish. Whole businesses they just disappeared. Video stores disappeared. There's no whatever. Okay. So here's what the Rambam says. Yeyamer li Yaakov, it'll be said to Yaakov, what has God wrought, is a reference to Nevuah coming back. That Hashem will communicate his Ratzon. And when will that happen? In a time like this. So this is how the Rambam's father had a Messiah. You take the year that Bilam is giving this Nevuah and add an equal number of years from that point. And that's the Hachzaras Nevuah. Ka'es. So we can figure out exactly when Bilam got his Nevuah. Because Bilam is in Navi the 40th year of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the last year. Now we know, we can figure out a lot of things. If you just remember one date, which is kind of almost funny, that is Avram Avinu's birthday happens to be 1948, the year 1948, right? Which is interesting because in the secular calendar, 1948 is Israel. Okay. By the way, I just read, as an aside, there's a very interesting book. I don't know if you ever saw this book. It's a book, anybody would enjoy it. It's like a book of Rav Chaim Kanevsky's Minhagim with a lot of pictures. So Pesach Minhagim, Rosh Hashanah Minhagim, Sukkot Minhagim, Tisha B'Av, everything. And all these pictures, every one has all sorts of pictures. Great. It's very, very interesting. Nice book to look at, very light reading. But there are interesting Minhagim there. And it just mentions that, number one, he almost never said Tachanun at all, because he was always a sandik for a bris, and a sandik does not say Tachanun, and a sandik paters the kehila. If you're a sandik, and even if the bris is not going to be in the minyan, the whole minyan is pater from Tachanun. But it said, but when he was not a sandik, if it was Yom Ha'atzmaut, he would. I'm sorry. If he was a sandik on Yom Ha'atzmaut, he left the shul before Tachanun, so they would have to say V'hu Racham. He didn't say V'hu Racham because he was a sandik, but he didn't want the shul to be pater from Tachanun, because people are going to say, oh, in Bnei Brak, they don't say Tachanun on Yom Ha'atzmaut, right? So Ad Kedei Kach, that he mamish left the shul before Tachanun, so they would have to say Tachanun, yeah. Yeah, he was both. He treated both of them the same. Okay, all right. So be it as it may, though, if you take the Rambam's idea of Hachzaras Nevuah, so here's the thing. Avram Avinu was born 1948. Yitzchak Avinu was born when Avram was 100 years old. So Yitzchak's birthday is 2048. Yetzias Mitzrayim is 400 years from the birth of Yitzchak. So that gives you, what's the year of Yetzias Mitzrayim? 2,448. Yetzias Mitzrayim. The 40th year is 2,488. Okay, you get the cheshbon? The cheshbon is a straightforward cheshbon. That means Bilam was nisnave in 2,488 years in Brias HaOlam. Nevuah will come back when from that time an equal amount of years elapses. So add 2488 to 2488. 16, 17, 5, 9, 4,976. So now we're, right, so this is, so this is less. This is, less than 200 years. Okay? So actually, Rav Kook kind of fits, based on that Rambam. Rav Kook's notion of Nevuah coming back in his time actually fits that paradigm. But the Rambam says that'll be Hachsaras Nevuah. So there's no way I'm even going to try to make all of these different dates consistent. They are different shitas. They are different approaches. Some of the dates have been proven to be incorrect. Some of the dates we're not yet sure. But it's not the pshat that each of these dates, has a consistency that we can tie down. But it's interesting that the idea of Chisha Fatetz, we really have a love-hate relationship with. We're told to hate it and keep away from it. And yet, the very Gedalim that say keep away from it, they want to give us some type of chizuk, some type of hope, some type of something to look forward to. The Rambam says as well, and this is Nogea today, that when people try to connect what is Gog and Magog, they say this, that, and that. He says really shouldn't do that either, because you'll only know it in hindsight. Meaning, when Mashiach comes, you'll be able to go backwards and say, this was that, and this was that, and this was that. But you never know it as it's coming to you. You never know it as it's coming to you, because it could be a million things, or it could change, meaning maybe it was a messianic process that got aborted because we weren't Zeicha. This is what the Chassam Sofer says generally. If you remember, when Moshe Rabbeinu asked by the Egel, when he was praying for forgiveness for the Chedo Egel, so he said, Harenina, Hodienina Estrochacha, show me your ways. Show me your ways. I want to understand you. So do you remember the scene? Very mysterious. Hashem puts him in the cleft of a rock. He says, I'm going to place my hands over your eyes, and my glory will pass by you, and you will see me from the back, and you will not see me from the front. V'ra'isa es achorai, upanai lo yera'o. So what is the front? What is the back? There is a Gemara that says he saw the knot of Hashem's tefillin, whatever that means. But the Chassam Sofer says, Lefi Pshutai, which is really a Pashut Pshat. The Chassam Sofer says, you can only understand the Darchei Hashem when it's past you. After everything happens, then you can look back and see why this was, why this was, why this was, why this was. You will understand me from the back after I passed you. You will not understand me as I'm coming towards you. Meaning many things happen to us, both individually and as a nation. We don't always understand it. And we try to posit, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe this is the messianic sign. Maybe, maybe, maybe. Maybe not. After it all happens, you'll look back and you'll say, now I get it. Right? That's what the Chassam Sofer says, Risa Sachurai, Upanai Lo Yero. And the Rambam says, in addition, that it's not kedai to start correlating current events to messianic prophecies, although people very much enjoy doing it. His lashon is, these things do not bring a person to Yiras Hashem or Abbas Hashem. It kind of becomes a little bit of a game, but it doesn't necessarily increase a person's Yiras Shamayim and Abbas Hashem. And in life, we should occupy ourselves with those things that make us greater Avdei Hashem. A davar that doesn't make you a greater Avdei Hashem is not necessarily. Of course, that opens up another controversy, a whole other kind, nothing to do with our topic at all. But if the notion is you should only be Isaac and those in Yonim that bring you to Abbas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So what about all this emphasis on theoretical Gemara learning, right? What would the Rambam say about it? We spend our time on all sorts of sugyas that are not directly nogeya to Abbas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Shnayim ochsim betalas, whatever it would be, Be'esh and Oda B'yamtef, right? If anything, a yeshiva, if I had to give a secular analog, is closer to a law school than a theological seminary. If a person would go to a Christian school, all they talk about all day is, the nature of God. It's like having lahavdil, million Havdalas. It's like learning Derech Hashem the whole day. That's what they do in a seminary. In yeshiva, all right, so we do Derech Hashem, 15 minutes, whatever it would be. But the main bread and butter is Gemara. So the truth is, a yeshiva is much closer to a law school than it is to a theological seminary. Right? So what's going on? So the emes is, the Chayvus HaLevavos, actually says, the Chayvus HaLevavos is actually very critical of people who spend too much time on theoretical Gemaras that are not Nogea LaHalacha and they're not Nogea to Musar and Midos. He gives a story, and it's amazing why the Chayvus HaLevavos is so makubal in the yeshiva world. Maybe they don't get to this page. He basically has a page in which he says the whole yeshiva system is wrong, in which somebody asked his Rebbe a very intricate shaila about a Hilchos Gittin, a theoretical shaila, Chakira. And the Rebbe said to him, have you already perfected your midos? And are you perfect in Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem? That you spend your time asking me questions that will happen once in 10,000 years? Don't you think it would be a better use of your time to focus on the learning that improves your midos? That's a pretty anti-yeshiva statement. Now, what's our answer? What's our teretz, Taka? What is our teretz? So our teretz is the Nefesh HaChaim. Nefesh HaChaim was writing Nefesh HaChaim for precisely that reason, in which he says that this is a spiritual process that's not necessarily rational. And that is, since the Torah and Hashem are one, Hashem's will is the same as Hashem. When you're Isaac in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, even if it's about Shor Shenagach HaSapara, even if it's about Kofar HaKol, right? It's about all sorts of unsavory characters, right? How much of our time are we spending learning about liars and cheats and thieves and, and wild animals that kill people and gore people? What is all this? What is so spiritual here? But Rav Chaim Voloshener says you're connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's going to change you, and that's going to lift you up. And that was his basic idea, that the learning of Torah itself elevates you. And that's our defense or our excuse, whatever you want to call it. But I just want to say, the Chayvus HaLevavos didn't, he was a dayan. He was not an Amoritz. He was a great Talmid Chacham too. But he felt you learn to know halacha l'maisas and to work on your mitos. That's what learning is for. Learning is a means to know Hashem's tangible will and to improve your mitos. So he learned Gemara with that in mind. But the notion of the metaphysical idea that the immersion in all of the theoretical aspects of Torah itself is going to transform you, that is really from the Gra, Rav Chaim Voloshener, and the like. So the yeshiva world is based on the Nefesh HaChaim, which is why I say it's an odd conjunction that the Chayvus HaLevavos is very makubal, but people don't realize there are passages there that, if someone other than the Chayvus HaLevavos were to say them, they would be called an apikoros today. Your kaifer in the kayach of Torah, whatever it would be. Yeah.
So the Musar yeshivas like Navar, didn't they follow that Maharal?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So you do have to differentiate a little bit, and that is there were pure Musar yeshivas that kind of followed the Chayvus HaLevavos' trend, but that eventually petered out. The Chiddush of Slobodka, the Alter of Slobodka, was Machadesh, a new type of yeshiva that combined Musar with the Vilna Gaon's emphasis on abstract Torah learning. And that was a mizuk, that was a chiddush. You're correct. That was not the natural way a Musar yeshiva developed. In Kelm, for example, at least initially, it was much more like you learned Musar the whole day. based on Chavis Halavavas' idea. But eventually, the Alter of Slobodka was mashpi on Mir. He had a lot of influence on a lot of. He sent, in fact, he would send Talmidim to all these yeshivas to tell us to Mir. So Slobodka was in a way kind of a mother yeshiva of Musar, but it was a Musar that combined very intense limud hatayra, alpi the Gra of Chaim Volozhiner. So he didn't really have it in that form at that point. And so today, as I say, well, to the degree that we have Musar yeshivas, I'm not sure if we do. I'm not sure if Ravova may have been the last real Baal Musar. I mean, people have a Musar Seder, but that wasn't. Rabbi Shlomo didn't envision like a little Musar Seder. It was like Musar was a much bigger thing. But we certainly don't have the 100% Musar that the Chavis Halavavas might have advocated. Now, in some Hasidic yeshivas, you do. I mean, I think in the Chabad yeshivas, even there, Gemara is the main subject, but they'll do Hasidus for maybe 3.5 hours a day. I mean, they will have a big chunk of Hasidus. They consider that to be like equally important. That was not kind of our Messiah. All righty. Okay, you all guys be well. I don't know if anyone going to Chutz La'aretz, or you're hoping to stay?
I'm trying.
Okay. Well, I never know if I should wish you Hatzlacha or wish you not Hatzlacha, but you should. But if you are going, should be Yitzchak L'Shalom, and even more importantly, Abayacham L'Shalom, and everybody should be well and safe.
Do you think this is a work of